Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, political reporter with the State Journal-Register. With me on the remote panel today, Charlie Wheeler is back. He is former director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield for a long time. And before that, a long-time State House reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, continuing State House observer and budget expert. Charlie, welcome back.
Thank you. It's fun to be here, I guess, but under different circumstances, right?
We all miss the contact, and I'm sure Kent Redfield would agree. Kent is also here. He is Professor Emeritus of Political Science, but still busy all the time. University of Illinois Springfield. Kent, welcome back to you.
Good to be here.
And given that both of you are such budget experts, I would like to wish you a happy fiscal 2021, because as people who watch the state carefully know, July 1st starts the new fiscal year, and it's named after the year to come. So we are there, and we are in the middle of still a pandemic, although Illinois has gone through a lot of pain, a lot of stay-at-home orders. Things have started to open up. June 26th was the day that Phase 4 began across the state, which allowed some indoor service legally, finally, at restaurants, some more open businesses. Kent, how do you think things are going with Phase 4 in Illinois versus some other states?
Well, so far so good. Now, that sometimes that so far so good is what somebody says, halfway down the building after they've fallen off. So we don't know where this is heading, but we certainly seem to have done better than a lot of states that didn't shut down hard, didn't preach the social distancing, and then were really super eager to open everything up at once. And so our numbers have ticked up a little bit, but they are still, we look pretty good by comparison to what's going on in some of the southern states. There's still a lot of, ways to go in terms of we're just still learning about how exactly this virus is going to react, mutate, change, and so I think at this point the governor is taking some credit for having navigated us through this pretty well.
Charlie, there continues to be, as in other parts of the country, and particularly in some central and southern parts of our state, negative reaction to government telling folks what to do. There's a lawyer named Tom DeVore who's got several cases, including that of State Representative Darren Bailey, continuing in court, trying to say that the governor exceeded his authority by going beyond 30 days of calling a state of emergency and ordering, for example, businesses to be closed and people to wear masks. I believe DeVore is also representing a couple in Clay County that doesn't want the new school regulations to include the mandate that students wear masks. I guess we continue to have this kind of division in the country. Any idea where that will go and how the Democratic governor, J.B. Pritzker, with the Democratic legislature behind him, comes out of all of this as we look back on 2020 eventually?
Well, it occurs to me that if you look at what's happening in Illinois and compare it with what's happening in other states, I think you wouldn't have any choice but to admit that what Pritzker decided to do was for the better of the people of Illinois. The numbers coming out of Florida, for example, Texas, Arizona, all with governors who didn't put really hard lockdowns in place, resisted it for a long time, didn't tell people to wear masks, and now suddenly they're rolling back. Texas has said you can't have your bars open. Florida, the same thing. And the numbers there are just going through the roof, whereas Illinois has been ticking down. Now, we opened up last week, and we have seen a slight uptick. And so we're now in what the Capital News Illinois, which is a statewide reporting network, said is kind of a red flag trend. Some of our numbers are a little higher now than they had been before we opened up, but we're still in very good shape relative to the rest of the country. And I think the idea that somehow you're infringing upon my freedom when you tell me to do something that will protect other people from me in case I'm an asymptomatic carrier, I don't think the courts are going to fall for that, or they're not going to bite. Maybe in Clay County they will, but ultimately, if the case reaches the Illinois Supreme Court, I can't imagine that the justices are going to say, oh no, Governor, you don't have the authority in an emergency to promulgate rules that would have people protect others.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up, Charlie, but obviously some of the downstate legislators say, we're not Chicago, our numbers are not as bad, and I realize that.
Oh, no, and of course, and I understand that those downstate communities all have high walls around them and moats and with alligators, and it's really difficult if you're coming from Chicago or the suburbs to get into one of those towns. So, oh yeah, they're like isolated, they're safe, they don't have to worry about it. I mean, that's baloney. And particularly when you look at some of the downstate small counties that have had these outrageous hotspots in nursing home facilities, for example, this is not a virus that limits itself to urban areas. It's not a virus that says, oh, this is a little small town. Oh, I don't want to go here. And it's just everywhere. And the notion that, well, we don't have as many as Chicago, on a per capita basis, there are some areas downstate and some rural areas around the country that are every bit as infected as major metropolitan areas.
Yeah. Kent, I'll go to you, and I guess I'm doing it on TV, even though I don't want to dwell on it, but the Sun-Times did a story this week talking about how there have been some extra state police assigned to the governor because he's gotten so many threats that have been checked out by the state police. I think there were like 11 threats they talked about. You know, don't tell me to do this, don't tell me to do that, and you belong not to be with us anymore. I guess that's the kind of thing when tough decisions have to be made, and there's a lot of pain going around economically and otherwise.
Yeah, there's no question. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of anxiety. And, you know, and people get upset. And there certainly are voices out there that feed that try to, you know, to stir people up and to, you know, for their own purposes. So it is also the case that 20 years ago, if you grumbled about a public official or, you know, wrote a letter to the newspaper, you know, that didn't suddenly, you weren't statewide. Now you put things on social media, and people don't realize, particularly, you know, I think younger people are more sophisticated, but people don't realize how broadly something put on Facebook or one of the other social medias can spread, and how easy it is for law enforcement to you know, to track things down and to you know, you say one thing, if they get their attention and they find, you know, a dozen other, you're going to get a much more serious look. And so it's a combination of a lot of stress, a very polarized political climate, and then the way that the social media kind of takes these sorts of things and amplifies them. So it's, you know, it's a volatile time. And I think people have to be, public officials, you know, really should be very wary about feeding into the kind of, you know, reaction that you've had in terms of some of the death threats that we saw in the story in the papers. So it's a, you know, it's a byproduct of the political climate we're in and the technology that we have. It certainly is troubling, but the amount of stress that people have gone through, you know, that sometimes it's a wonder that you know, that there hasn't been more of this.
Right, and I will say that I'm in my basement, but I think some people my age in their basements, when they're on their computer, may not realize how easy it is for police to figure out where you are because they can track your computer. So the hiding behind the keyboard may not always work for long if you get into a certain controversy. Charlie, I should mention that as of Wednesday of this week, casinos and gambling machines have been able to operate. once again after being closed down for a couple or a few months because of the pandemic. Obviously, the state is way behind in revenue. This is a way to gain more tax revenue at the state and local level, as well as provide business for the establishments, that the casinos and other restaurants and bars that have these machines in them. On the other hand, it's also a way for people who may have been out of work for a while to lose more money in those slots. Charlie, it's just kind of an interesting thing because Illinois has become such a gambling center after for so many years not wanting to do almost any of that except scratch off tickets under Governor Dan Walker. But any thoughts on that part of the reopening and what it means for the state and the state budget that is going to be in some distress regardless?
Well, I think it will definitely help the state budget. And a lot of the new gambling that was enacted or authorized in the law that was enacted last year, the proceeds from that are going to go for infrastructure project, not roads and bridges, but for schools and buildings, that kind of stuff, parks. And so we certainly do need the money. And I think one of the new elements is this online betting.
Right.
And that opened up, I believe, a week or so ago with the first casino, Rivers, up in the Chicago area, taking bets.
Right.
And that was after the governor issued an executive order saying that, unlike the original requirement that if I wanted to bet online at a casino, I would have to go in person and register to do it, and then I could do it from my home. The governor said, well, under the conditions, you don't have to do that. As long as you're a resident of Illinois, and as long as you're over, I think is it 18 or 21? I don't recall. But then you can do it by phone or by computer. And I'm interested to see, because there was a lot of speculation about how well this would go. And one of the things that one of the columnists, I don't know, it was for maybe ESPN, pointed out that with the ability to bet using your phone, you could be watching a football game and you could bet not on the outcome or the spread. You could bet on, okay, this next play is going to be a pass, or it's going to be a run, or more specifically, it's going to be a pass to the tight end after a fake to the halfback. So you could be betting literally virtually every play. And I know back in the day, they used to talk about people in the bleachers at Wrigley Field who would bet on pitches. The next pitch is going to be a fastball. No, it's going to be a curve. And if you're someone who really enjoys the thrill of that, I think my guess is we're going to make a lot of money off that. The state will.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And I'm thinking that it's certainly going to come in handy.
Well, will certainly be needed. Interesting. Speaking of money, Kent, some has been spent on some political ads already, oddly, and some of them aimed at the governor, who is not on the ballot until 2022, assuming he runs again. Of course, his graduated income tax that he got the legislature to put on the November ballot last year, the legislature passed to put on the November ballot this year to allow different tax rates for different income levels, with, of course, the governor advocating only the top 3% will pay more, but Republicans and others opposed to this idea, saying, oh, with the state's money problems, the middle class will be affected. Anyway, that's coming up, but there's a group called Illinois Rising Action that has taken out ads saying that the governor, ripped out toilets from a mansion in Chicago. This is an ongoing controversy that seems to have come and gone during the last election time, because he got lower property taxes, and then the family paid it back for having the value of the home next to their main home in Chicago, the Pritzkers. They paid back Cook County for taxes not paid. But it also, in this ad, says that he approved a huge pay raise for politician buddies. And Pritzker has already put up ads saying the governor has accomplished a lot. And the alleged $1,800 pay raise to legislators, which is a cost of living increase that's in state law, but was not funded by the budget, is not there, even though, as you and I know, court action could return it. Anyway, you are the expert, Kent, on kind of political spending. What does this indicate for the rest of the year as people are home and watching their TV, perhaps more than usual?
Oh, I think this is, kind of the first volley in what's going to be an incredibly expensive campaign surrounding the graduated income tax. I mean, the opponents of the graduated income tax would like to dirty up Pritzker and then make him the poster boy for graduated income tax. If you can talk about the terrible person that's pushing policy, you don't have to talk so much about the policy itself. It certainly is the case that there are a lot more poor and middle class people than there are rich people. And so, if you frame it the way that the proponents want to frame it, we need money, we're going to get it from the other guy, and you're going to be fine. That's a pretty strong message, particularly when we see the kinds of cuts that are going to come once we get into trying to implement the budget over the next 6 months. Because we're going to be in just desperate revenue shape. And so I think that they will try to dirty him up. There's no question about it. Some of this is reminiscent of what Rauner tried to do to Pritzker in running ads during the Democratic primary until Rauner got his own problems with having a strong opponent and a backlash in terms of what he did. It turned out that, Rauner brought about $50 million of his own money and a pretty bad record to the race. And Pritzker brought $171 million of his money. So I think, the opponents of the graduate income tax definitely need deep pockets, because the governor has shown a willingness to spend a large chunk of his considerable fortune, being worth at more than $3 billion. And if you don't get the graduated income tax, then all of the kind of maneuvering in terms of getting some revenue from gambling, revenue from marijuana, bridging to the extra money from the graduate income tax to kind of get us out of the problems that the state is in. That was a pretty tough set of numbers even before the pandemic, and we lost all the revenue. So this is a battle that Pritzker really can't afford to lose if he wants to be doing anything during the last 2 years of his term other than just cutting programs and cutting spending. So it's going to be an incredibly expensive campaign in the fall, on top of the normal, $1 million legislative races that seem to be kind of the norm these days.
Yeah, Charlie, as the another longtime observer of the legislative process and these things, how's it looking for the graduated income tax? Any thoughts?
I would think that the folks who are opposed to it have a tougher haul than the people who are favoring it. And the reason I say that is the basic message for the anti-people is, well, you can't trust the legislature, and if we approve this change to the Constitution, taking away the requirement for a flat rate income tax, then they're going to raise your taxes. And the people who are pushing it can say, if you take it away, here's where the taxes are going to go up. And if you look at it, you'll see that most of you aren't going to pay anything more. Some of you will wind up paying less. And the fact of the matter is, with or without the amendment, the legislature at its will could raise taxes on everybody. So I think the fact that there are a lot more, as was said, there are a lot more middle class people, a lot more poorer people than they are the folks who are making more than $1 million a year, that makes it easier for the proponents.
Yeah, and
although they do have to get an extraordinary majority, they have to get 60% of the people who vote on the issue, or they have to get a majority of the people voting in the election.
Right, and trust in government, if it can be framed as a trust in government issue, may make it more difficult, I think. On the other hand, as Kent pointed out, Governor Pritzker, through the outside group, because he can't advocate for a ballot issue as governor, but he can donate money to an outside group that does, will certainly make the point that you just made, Charlie, about, let only a certain part of the upper crust pay this extra tax, and other people will pay the same or even potentially
Yeah,
less.
and the fact of the matter is, we already pay a graduated income tax to the federal government. That's been in place like forever, and the majority of the states with income tax do have a graduated rate.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, and this was a couple years ago, I actually did calculations based on the tax instructions from a number of our neighboring states, and depending on who's I'm trying to remember exactly, if we had all of Wisconsin's rules, we pay more. If we had Missouri's rules, we pay less. That kind of thing. It depends on the exemptions and the deductions that are incorporated as part of the package.
Gotcha.
But I think it is fair to say that most Illinoisans would pay either the same or less.
That certainly will be the argument, and we'll watch for that. Kent, with the coming of July, we got some new state laws. One of them is actually it's another tick upwards in the minimum wage. It has been at $9.25. It went to $10 as of July 1st. When schools come in, LGBTQ history will have to be taught and reflected in schools. And a semester of civics will have to be taught between 6th and 8th grade. So the minimum wage comes at an interesting time because so many businesses have been in trouble. And I know some people who don't like the governor have been saying, why doesn't he just stop the minimum wage? Now, of course, it's a legislative thing, but it is interesting that, and of course, in Cook County, I believe the minimum wage is already at least $10. So it's the rest of the state that gets this difference. But I don't think the governor is inclined to compartmentalize or do anything to hold back on raising the minimum wage, which will go up in dollar increments now until it's $15 in 2025, but it's going up to 10, which will certainly help some workers, but also put some more pressure on business folks. Ken?
Yeah, and I know the governor is not interested at all in, even if he had the authority to kind of slow down or pause this increase. That was the signature issue. That was one of the things in terms of that his first session where he made a commitment, and the governor says, I always listen, and he does always listen, but sometimes he does exactly what he said he would do before he started listening, and this is one of those cases. And in terms of his base, both in terms of organized labor and the idea that we're building the middle class, this is something that he doesn't have to look like the greatest progressive in terms of some of the factions of the Democratic Party, as long as he's got solid basic things that are part of that broader agenda. It's also an indication of the political shift in the state that there are a lot of downstate voices raising issues about this, but the political power in the state has shifted really to the suburbs as much as to Chicago. I mean, northeastern Illinois is really where the population and the votes in the legislature are. And if you're going to make a case about downstate, you've got to make a strong case, and you ought to build some bridges to the Democrats, because that's where all of the votes are. So, this is, depending on how you like things are going, this is an indication of what at least some of the policy decisions are going to look like, at least for the next 2 years.
Interesting. A couple of things going on. One, Facebook announced this last week that it's going to build an $800 million data center in DeKalb with 100 workers ultimately. So that's some interesting news for the state. And I also just wanted to bring in one federal thing, but Tammy Duckworth, the junior senator from Illinois, continues to be in the mix for a possible running mate for Joe Biden. We don't know where that goes as we tape the show. Charlie, Tammy Duckworth, any thoughts on, she's kind of the Illinois person who could be on a national ticket.
Well, I think she's got a lot of attractive qualities. if you just analyze her as a political candidate. For starters, she's female, obviously. She's also a war hero, having lost her legs when her helicopter was attacked over in Iraq.
Right.
Yeah. She's also someone who's very articulate. She's a mom. So there's a lot of things that she can relate to. She's also a minority.
And she's also really not scared to take on President Trump, which she's been doing.
Oh, not at all.
Okay, and with that, we're going to end this week's conversation. Thanks for the thoughts, Charlie. Charlie Wheeler, thank you. Kent Redfield, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and thank all of you for watching Capitol View, and we'll see you next time.